It is not uncommon for people to lift weights to grow and strengthen their muscles. But what about their brain? Is there any evidence to suggest that lifting weights or doing resistance training on a regular basis can actually help your brain grow and function better? And if so, how should you go about doing it in order to get those results? On today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, this is what Julie and I will be discussing. We're going to cue the intro song and then we're going to dive right into this conversation. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Charlie. Before we dive into this week's episode, I want to let you know that we recently released a book called The Exercise for Life Method. And if you enjoy the conversations that we have every single week on this podcast, then you are going to love this book. So to pick up a free copy of this book, all you have to do is go to exerciseforlifemethod.com. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, here in Schaumburg, Illinois. Now, at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, we believe your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. But guess what? There's more that exercise can do than just build the health and function of your muscles. You may have also heard that exercise can build the health and function of your brain. And that's what we want to talk with you about today. And not just any form of exercise, but specifically resistance training. Why? Because resistance training is so often seen as something that only benefits your muscles. Oh, I don't want to become a bodybuilder, so I'm not going to lift weights. Oh, I don't feel like I need to get stronger, so I'm not going to lift weights. But there's so many more benefits that can come from lifting weights, and especially as it pertains to your brain, if you're not doing resistance training, you may be leaving a lot of those benefits on the table.
I am so excited about this conversation today because we are going to be diving into more of what to do to help the health and function of your brain, and specifically brain size too. That is more than just doing the Sudoku and the word puzzles and the number puzzles that come in the daily newspaper. Today we're going to be talking about one of the ways that you can grow the health and function and size of your brain, which is resistance training. And I actually want to start off by reading a little blurb from Charlie's new book called The Exercise for Life Method. And this comes from his brain health chapter. And if you have the book, I know a lot of our listeners do, we're going to be reading starting on page 133, but I just think these little blurbs capture such powerful chunks from the research that will paint a really nice picture for us to get started on this conversation. Additionally, twice weekly resistance training for 1 year has been shown to decrease white matter atrophy. These results were measurable for 1 year after the cessation of training. One thing that is important to note about this is the duration of time that it took to have measurable results. While 12 months appears to be a sufficient amount of time to create significant changes when exercising twice per week, shorter durations, such as 3 months, have shown insignificant results when doing a combination of both resistance training and aerobic exercises for an hour twice per week. As such, if you are going to use exercise to build your brain volume, you need to look at it as a long-term process, and preferably something that you will need to do for the rest of your life.
As you read that, I'm sitting here thinking, I definitely should have had you read the audiobook, because you did that in one take and it took me about 7 takes per paragraph to get that audiobook recorded. So first of all, well done with that.
Well, thank you.
But secondly, I think that paragraph in particular really speaks to the importance of finding a way to exercise that you can do for the long term. I mean, how many times do we see people get excited about their exercise and that lasts for 2 to 6 weeks max, and they're like, well, why am I not getting the results? Or I'm seeing changes, but it's not happening fast enough. Or, this just, I just can't keep this up because, my body's aching and now I'm injured and things like that. And so to me, that paragraph really highlights the importance that, especially when it comes to brain health, you need to find a way to exercise that you can keep coming back to day after day after day, because it's probably going to take a good 12 months or more to really start to see noticeable changes.
You know, Charlie, when you were saying that, and you know how people always exercise and they want to see like, you know, well, the results get me motivated. A lot of what you actually talk about in this book, including brain health and function, it's very difficult to track. I mean, if you were to say, hey, after a year, your brain volume is going to have changed because of your exercise, I think that would be really motivational. Just not a lot of people know that that happens, number one. And second of all, not a lot of us are going to go and get the appropriate scanning done to be able to track this. We're all still focused so much on weight and performance, which again is a valid goal when you're including exercise. But again, it's not that goal of exercise. The goal of exercise, again, is to improve the health and function of your body, your brain included. That's what we're focusing on today. And it's so interesting because we always say it just as like a blanket statement. But to know that, hey, if you exercised and specifically weight trained twice a week for a whole year, then you have significant brain volume changes, which is incredible. That's really cool that you can do that. The second thing I wanted to highlight is that the research does show that if you do it for 3 months, not 12 months, you don't have that significant change. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of 90-day programs. You guys know about those 90-day programs? And again, those aren't bad. It's just that the end of your exercise life and your exercise lifespan is not going to be 90 days. It needs to be much, much longer.
I want to go back to one of the earlier points that you made, because I think it's right on. The idea that if somebody said, okay, you know what, if you do this consistently for a year, you know, there's plenty of studies that show that you will actually see growth in your brain. And people might say, a year? Like, really? Like, all right, maybe I can do it for a year, and that's when we'll see noticeable brain volume changes. But I think there's also a flip side to that as well. And once you hit a certain age, I believe in the book it says 65, okay? Again, there's plenty of papers to show this. Once you hit 65, every single year, your brain atrophies. You lose 1 to 2% of the volume of certain areas of your brain. Yet exercise has been shown to completely combat that and actually be able to grow your brain 1 to 2% per year. Okay. So you could say, all right, well, yeah, it's going to take a year to see that growth, but that year is going to go by anyways. And if you don't do anything with the course of the year, you're going to be down 1 to 2%. So which do you want, right? Like, do you want to stick it out for the year and actually see that, okay, yeah, your brain's improving? Or do you just want to say, well, that's too long for me to wait, and a year from now, your brain is actually shrunk? Like that, those are really the cards on the table right there. And sometimes people are like, okay, yeah, that's really motivational because I see the positive. But I think a lot of times also people are seeing the negative and they're like, yeah, I don't want that. So like, are they metaphorically running towards pleasure, or are they metaphorically running away from pain, right? We're all doing one of two things in our actions. One of the two things is driving us. And I think both of those statistics, combined, it's like either way, your brain's either growing or it's shrinking. 12 months is going to go by no matter what. You get to decide where you're at the end of that 12 months.
Absolutely. I actually love that you said that, because we all plan, I think most of us plan to live for the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years, the next 4 years. And sometimes we use that as a reason where it's like, well, right now is not a good time. We're going through a lot of junk, or, we have a lot of stress, or we're moving, or I've got this ankle thing going on, or I've got, just had babies. That's my current excuse, And so we always are thinking, we have all this time, but also we have all this time for our body to be getting worse. And most of us, especially if you're listening to this podcast, you are in the category that Charlie and I are in, where our bodies are naturally getting worse. We're on the decline, all of us. And
I'm still peaking.
You're okay. Charlie is actually the scientific anomaly of still peaking. But you're still peaking because you work on it. Mm-hmm. It's not like because you're sitting around naturally getting better. Mm-hmm. Unlike our toddler, True. She just sleeps and she gets better. She just goes to the park and she gets better. She eats some mac and cheese and she gets better because she's just going to keep getting better. We, if you're listening, especially, we are not getting better, but we can do something to get better. Mm-hmm. And so because that time is going to pass anyways, I don't care if you're knocking down monumental goals or if you are still peaking, quote unquote. It would be cool just for us to maintain even. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of work to maintain.
Yeah, it definitely is.
But if you think about all this stuff starting to happen at the age of 65, which, you know what, I want to give the brain some credit because it hangs on a lot longer than the rest of our body.
Oh, than your joints and
our joints and muscles,
digestive systems, and absolutely.
Yeah, like the projected average age that your muscles start not peaking naturally is 35. And for it to be 65 for your brain, that's pretty cool. But a lot of us project our lives to be a lot longer than 65. I mean, think about us living into our 80s, our 90s, and many people living into their hundreds now. We want our brains to be sharp. And if we can do that just by twice a week, regular resistance training and aerobic exercise, then let's do it because, again, that time is going to pass anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, one of the big points from that snippet of the Exercise for Life method is the idea that it's going to take that 12 months for your brain to start to show that noticeable improvement in volume. And so when you're thinking about your exercise, don't think of it as something that you're going to do for the next 30 days or until your race is over or until you hit your goal weights or anything like that. It needs to be something that you're thinking about. This is going to be a long-term thing because, I might get to hold on to the benefits for a bit longer after I stop. But the reality is if I'm not actively trying to improve my health or improve my brain volume, those things eventually will start to decline. So thinking about it long-term, I think that's a big takeaway from me from that paragraph that you read.
All right. So we were just talking about brain volume. So that is like the brain size. But one of the things that I think is very popular in the conversation around aging when it comes to your brain is your ability to remember stuff, right? So I want to read another little snippet and then I want to talk about it. This is coming from page 135 from the Exercise for Life method. Resistance training has also been shown to improve memory when done on a consistent basis, which was considered to be a minimum of 2 times per week for 1 year. When participants limited their resistance training to 1 time per week, however, the improvements in memory and cognitive function were not found. As such, the frequency of your workouts is an important aspect of effectively using exercise to build the health and function of your brain.
Yeah, that's another key paragraph in chapter 5 of the Exercise for Life method, talking about your brain's supercharger, which is exercise. And the reason why that's such a key paragraph is because as you wrapped up with Julie, it speaks to the importance of the frequency of your workouts. So not only are we getting from the first paragraph the fact that we need to be thinking long-term with our workouts, we also need to understand that if you're just lifting weights once a week, if you're just thinking, okay, I'm going to do my 1 class a week, I'm going to go for my 1 run a week, if it's a once a week thing for you, that's not frequent enough to get these changes in the brain that the research is showing is possible with exercise, and specifically, as that paragraph alluded to, with improvements in memory. And for a lot of people, that's a really, really big thing. I can think of few things that are scarier for people when they start to realize that they're not able to remember things as well as they once did. Because I think for a lot of people, that's the start of the realization that their brain is really starting to go downhill. Yeah, we start to notice things with our body like, my joints feel weird, or, my muscles are tight, or stuff like that. But when you start to not be able to remember things, not as sharp as you once were, I think whether people admit it to themselves or not, deep down, that's actually pretty frightening for a lot of people, because they're like, oh, wow, like what's going to happen tomorrow? Is it all just downhill from here? And so the idea of exercise actually being able to change that, but you need to be able to do it frequently enough in order to get those changes, that's a really big thing.
I just have a couple things that I was just telling you about, Charlie. And this is, I don't know, this is just a story that I had in my own life, but just maybe 2 days ago, I was telling you, like, I feel like my brain has been like smush. I cannot remember. And the things that were crazy that I was noticing that I find to be annoying that other people do to me is like when they tell me the same story over and over again. And I was like, I literally can't remember who I tell what information to. Like, I'll call my mom. I'm like, I can't remember if I told you this, but I'm about to tell you. I literally can't remember. And I've always really prided myself on having like this super sharp memory. Like, I remember a lot of things that most people don't even notice. And anyways, I told Charlie, I was like, it's either because of mom brain, like lack of sleep, or lack of exercise. Like, I haven't been consistently exercising since having my second baby. And, I blame all the things because I'm tired, I'm stressed, I'm not eating enough, I'm nursing too much, or whatever it is. I'm blaming that. So after that conversation, I decided to start exercising again. But I got to exercise 2 days in a row, and I felt so much better in my brain. It was like I was living in a natural like brain fog, and then I just felt so much sharper after that experience. So that was just like a little quick experience that I'm just thinking about right now because it literally happened to me this week. But I can't imagine what it would be like to not exercise for years and how that might change your brain when you start exercising, or your experience of your brain, because I think that is even more appealing than the brain size, because brain size can go, we don't ever see it, so it almost doesn't seem real to us. Unlike muscle size, like we can see when our muscles are atrophying and getting smaller, but brain size, it's in our skull's not shrinking, but what's inside of our skull. But what we do know is when people start feeling like, wow, my brain is not at the function where it used to be. I'm not having the recall. I'm not having the memory. I'm losing words. I'm losing, that ability for your brain to perform. And so I think it's so important that we see that this is happening when we exercise, that this is improving. I do want to bring up something really interesting, and this is just observation from myself, and I'd be curious to talk to her again. But we had interviewed a few years back the lead memory and brain doctor from Amita Health, and she was talking about things you can do to improve the health and function of your brain. And one thing that she said was resistance training, and she said specifically your upper body. And I kind of thought, oh, that's cool. I don't know, maybe because your arms are closer to your brain. I don't know. But now that I think about it, how many cardio exercises do you have easy access to that include your arms? Very minimal, right? I mean, unless you're rowing, which not a lot of people have access to a rowboat or a row machine, right? That would be like a specialty gym thing, or an arm crank, or one of those rope puller things, right? That's like arm cardio. Swimming, right? Swimming might be the most common one. But most of the time when we think about cardio, we're thinking biking, running, walking, all of the lower body stuff. And so I was thinking, I wonder if they noticed that brain function improved when people did upper body exercise because it was more total body-esque. And it was more, when you're doing upper body exercise, it's going to be more resistance training versus a cardio thing where it's mainly lower body and minimal, like the bias towards lower body is much stronger. Now that we're talking about it, I kind of thought, I don't know, maybe that was the flaw in the research or something. But anyways, all we know is that she also had seen that in her understanding of how exercise is able to improve the health and function of your brain.
Yeah, it's really interesting you bring that up because I remember exactly when she said it, but I didn't see the papers that she was discussing. But looking at the papers for the Exercise for Life method, the consistent theme that kept coming up when it came to improving brain function and improving brain size was intensity. If you think about going for a run versus lifting weights for your legs, okay? Most people are not running at the intensity, meaning the relative intensity for their leg muscles. It's not nearly the same as it is when they are lifting weights for it, right? So when you're lifting weights for your legs, usually that's a higher intensity challenge than it is when you go for a walk or for a run. That's why you can go for a walk for 20 minutes to an hour, but you do a set of leg press for 60 seconds, right? So, I mean, it's dramatically different there. The intensity is higher when you're doing the resistance training. And a lot of the changes from a brain perspective are dependent on intensity. in addition to duration and frequency and the other things that we're talking about. But intensity seems to be a really big one. And I break this all down in the book and actually kind of give the mechanisms and the science behind it. So the reason why I bring that up is because, like you're saying, Julie, if most people are thinking, okay, well, I'm going to go exercise, and my exercise is going for a walk, or maybe I'm going for a run or whatever, and that's mostly challenging for the lower body, but again, on a relative intensity scale, it's not nearly as intense as lifting weights. So they think, okay, I'm going to do that for my legs, but then for my upper body, I'm going to lift weights. Now all of a sudden, the relative intensity that you're doing for those groups of muscles way up, right? Much more intense for the upper body lifting than it is for the lower body when you're doing cardio. Again, I didn't see the research, but thinking through the different papers that I referenced when putting together this book, that's one potential explanation of why it might be that doing lifts with your upper body creates greater changes in brain health and function.
I could totally see that, because think of how many people, I can think of like 3 or 4 people just on the top of my head that have said to me, well, I only lift upper body when I'm at the gym because I like to run or because I bike. And so they're thinking because they're using their legs for cardio, that is now also their lower body exercise. You have to think there's an inverse relationship between intensity and time. Something that is super intense, you can only do for a very short amount of time. Something that is not very intense, you can do for a longer period of time. So I'm not saying one is good or bad. I'm just saying that that's how it is. And that means that there are many people that, use a lower intensity, longer duration, lower body, and higher intensity, lower duration, upper body. Yeah. So that's just speculation. But again, just kind of thinking about the different papers that I referenced when putting together the book, that's, I think, a plausible potential explanation. Love it. I want to now jump into some application of this. Cool. All right. So if I resistance train twice a week for a whole year, I will start to see these improvements. But then obviously you have to keep doing this. Right. You have to keep doing it. And I don't mean to go back to our bias. I think you guys probably know Charlie and I are very biased towards mechanics. But I think the first thing we have to talk about is creating exercise that your body can do again and again and again and again and return to again and again and again. And I think the first place where that starts is mechanics. Yeah. You know how many people listen to people like Charlie and I saying, oh, you got to do this high intensity thing, or, oh my gosh, go to this theory kind of gym and go to this style of workout. And people are like, man, my body can't tolerate that. I've got a hurt knee, or I've got a twingy back, or I've got a, you know what? Because earlier than any other system, probably, your joints and muscles have wear and tear, and they can't tolerate a bunch of stuff. And so it's like, okay, first, you got to be mindful of your mechanics while you're starting to apply these exercise principles to improve your health. And specifically today, we're talking about brain health. So it's like, great, you said I had to weight train twice a week for a whole year straight. And right now, I can't tolerate any of it. Right. I can't do any of it.
So what do you mean when you say mechanics? Dive a little bit more into that, because I think people are thinking of mechanics meaning like a wrench and and bolts and stuff, or like what do you mean by mechanics?
So I think mechanics would be, in the way we're talking, is like a shortened version of biomechanics, which is how your body and joints are moving. Now, our joints are probably the quickest thing in our body to wear down and break down, which is why a lot of people have joint issues and arthritis and early stages of arthritis called crepitus, which is like that snap, crackle, pop in your joint when you squat or when you bend over or whatever. So the first things first, when you exercise, you can't allow your exercise to make your mechanics worse, to make your ability to move, to make your ability to function worse. So there are a couple things you can do to try to help with this. Number one, when you go and do weights, you can move really slowly. This is probably the easiest, fastest, most potent thing you can do in the gym to make sure your weight training is respectful of your mechanics. Now, when I say move slowly, I didn't say move with no intensity. Moving slowly just means moving slowly. You can be lifting a whole bunch of weight. So that would be the first way to protect your muscles and joints basically. Move slowly.
I think another thing to add to that is, in addition to moving slowly, you can kind of take a second to feel how your body's moving before you do the exercise. So let's say you're going to do a shoulder press or an overhead press or a military press or whatever name you want to give the exercise, where you're sitting down and you are pushing straight up into the air, okay? Whatever you want to call that, you can just kind of feel how your shoulders and arms and shoulder blades are moving while doing that motion without holding any weight. Just, you can call it your warm up or whatever, but just kind of perform that motion a few times and just feel how your joints are moving, feel how your muscles are contracting, and kind of ask yourself, all right, can I feel my joints moving, or do I feel disconnected? Can I feel my muscles contracting, or do I feel disconnected from it all? And is there anything weird that I'm picking up on? Is there any tightness? Are there any twinges? Is there any kind of discomfort happening during this motion? And if you can, one, if you're not noticing any of that, any of the negative stuff, okay, cool. And you can feel like you're able to feel your muscles squeezing and your joints moving. Okay, awesome. But if it's anything other than that, then consider kind of staying in the part of the motion where you're not noticing the negative and you're picking up on the positive, meaning you're still feeling your muscles squeeze, you're still feeling your joints move, you're not noticing anything twingy, not noticing any tightness, not noticing any discomfort, and just kind of play in that part of the range of motion for a little bit of time, and go back and periodically check it throughout, your workout and see if that changes. Because I think that's another way to really stay kind of respectful to your body and really individualize your workout on that day.
I love that. And to sum that up, the way we like to say it is, you always want to be doing what you can do to be able to one day do what you cannot do. So respecting your range of motion, going slowly has so many benefits, meaning like you pick up on when your body says do not do anymore a lot quicker, or if there's a twinge that comes up in your joint, you will find out about that right when you needed to know versus 3 reps later. So really being mindful of moving slowly and observing your body, being respectful of your body, will allow you to keep returning. We don't want you leaving your workouts sore and achy, even though that is like something that is super highlighted and applauded in the current gym industry. You have our permission and you have our encouragement to leave your workouts feeling great and not feeling sore and beat up and achy. And that will really help you to return to your workouts again and again and again.
So there are a couple of things that you can do. You can start adding into your workouts immediately to not only help with your frequency of your workouts, but help with the longevity of your workouts, especially when it comes to resistance training. And this is so important, not only for the health of your entire body, but specifically for the health of your brain as well, because exercise is the most powerful thing that you can do to stimulate brain growth and to improve the health and function of your brain. So it is of the utmost importance that you are able to exercise not just today, not just tomorrow, but for the rest of forever. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is either skipping out on their resistance training or is curious as to why they should be resistance training if it's only for their muscles? Share this episode with them so they can learn about the brain health benefits that can come from resistance training, especially when done on a consistent basis and done for the long term. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find this content when they are looking for information on exercise and when they are looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week. So how'd you like that episode? Did you find the information useful? If you enjoyed what we discussed today, then you are going to love the Exercise for Life method, which is a book that we just put out and you can get a free copy of by going to exerciseforlifemethod.com. All we ask is that you pay for shipping and handling, so head there now and get your free copy, as well as some exclusive bonuses that you will get instant access to when you get the book. You can learn more and get your copy at exerciseforlifemethod.com. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Cates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.